Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk with Asians in Britain. I'm your host, Steph, and today we have a very special guest with us, Charles Yu, who is actually an award-winning author and scriptwriter based in California, and he's actually better known for being one of the lead writers of, I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of this, the TV series Westworld, and also for his latest novel, Interior Chinatown, which I actually have with me today, and actually won the 2020 National Book Award as well. So welcome, Charles. It'd be great if you can just quickly tell us a bit about yourself, who you are and what you do, and we'll just start from there.
Great. Thanks, Steph, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I am a writer, as you said, and I wrote Interior Chinatown, which was my second novel, fourth book. I was born and raised in Southern California. I've lived in the U.S. My whole life, and I, for a long time, worked as a lawyer while I was writing. And then as you mentioned, I got a job. My first job in TV was on Westworld, which was just kind of a huge shock. It just happened a few years ago, after I'd been practicing for quite some time. So I just thought it was this incredible opportunity. I was like the most junior person in the room, and really learned a lot from that experience. Some of which I think may have influenced the book as well.
And were you always really passionate about writing, or was it something that you kind of grew into as you grew up?
I was always passionate about, right? I mean, maybe passionate is too strong a word for when I was 8, but I was always interested in writing. Our class took a trip. I had this great teacher in fourth and fifth grade, Mr. Cott, and he would take us to Yosemite. He'd take like 30 elementary school kids to Yosemite every year. And while in Yosemite, I must have gotten inspired, and I started writing little poems on scraps of paper. And he found them, I guess, at the end of the trip, I think, and got the local paper to publish them. And that was like my first taste of publication.
Wow.
But I think more important than it was my first, feeling of like, oh, I wrote these words and somebody, was interested in them, and how I felt in terms of communicating feelings or impressions. So yeah, from a pretty young age, I was interested in writing, but I didn't actually start to, I guess, write formally until college, where at undergrad, I was a science major, but I minored in creative writing, and specifically in poetry. So I wrote poems as an undergrad. And then I went to law school. And after law school, right when I started to practice, for some reason, I decided to also write short stories. I think I needed some, like subconsciously, I must have been looking for some kind of safe space to carve out for myself, if that makes sense, or like a release valve for creative energy. So.
Is it did you ever want to pursue law at one point, or was it just something after you finished, you were like, oh, okay, actually, I don't think this is the route for me?
Well, it's a good question. I did end up practicing law, for years, for 13 years. As to
Wow.
whether or not I wanted to pursue it, that was a more gradual process. I think I was excited about the idea going into law school to, one, put off having to get a job, and two, I thought as a sort of just like a subject to study, I thought it'd be interesting, reading cases and reading about how those cases shape, society, I guess, or the law. And the reality of practicing was a totally different thing, and that was, it took some time to get used to. It took me a few years. I think I really felt like early on I wasn't going to last as a lawyer, and I was just kind of waiting for the day where someone walked in my office and said, "Get out," like you don't belong here, and it never happened. So I practiced much longer than I thought I would, and ended up, my wife and I, we have kids, and it was just a very stable profession, and I really enjoyed aspects of it. I enjoyed people. And I also liked that eventually I got to a place where I could write. I could work a full-time job, but have some time for writing. But yeah, you mentioned the traditional professions. I went through all three of the ones you mentioned. When I first started at Berkeley, I wanted to be an engineer. My dad was an engineer for many years, and he's now retired. And I couldn't hack it. And then I actually was a biology major, and I applied to medical school, and I didn't get in. So I thought, well, I need to do something, and maybe this is, somewhat specific, or I don't know. As a kid of immigrants, I felt like my parents. The last thing I want to do is have my parents have made the sacrifices they've made, and now here I am, like, freeloading off of them when I'm 35 or whatever. So I thought I better get my act together and get a job. Even though I think at that moment I did have thoughts of like, well, what if I what if I try to pursue writing? Like, what would that look like? There was no real, chance that I was going to be able to do that in my own head. So I applied to law school as this kind of like, all right, this is the responsible thing to do. And I know I love writing, but writing is always there. All you need is a pen and paper or a computer. So
That's true. And how did you, like, I would love to know, how did you transition, I guess, from being a full-time lawyer into like a full-time writer? I'm guessing like it's probably like there must be a lot of hurdle or challenges, especially when you go from someone who's being very experienced lawyer and then suddenly go into something that you might not have tried before in terms of as a full-on career. Like, what was it like?
yeah, it took a long time, and I didn't realistically think about it as a career even after I started publishing books. I started practicing law 20 years ago. And as I mentioned, that's really when I started writing fiction. So after a few months of kind of experimenting, I started to send out stories to small journals and literary magazines. And after many rejections, I started to get a little bit of traction, and I got a story accepted, and it's really exciting. And so those built up. I eventually started publishing. Uh, I published enough stories to have a story collection that came out, and that was really the first time where the reality hit me, because it thought, this is kind of a lifelong dream, and and yet at the same time, it was the dream met reality, which was there's no way I could live off this book, of like what I was paid for this book, and in terms of the sales. And so I thought, oh, so it was both like exciting and fulfilling, and really like I was thrilled that I would get to write another book, hopefully, um, and to keep writing. But then I also had to accept at that point, oh, I'm good. I'm not going to be able to like live in a cabin, or no one's going to hire me to teach at a university. I have to like keep working as a lawyer. Um, so it wasn't until three books in that I started working in television. And the way that happened, and the reason I mentioned television is that that's what became my new day job. It's not as if I actually had a moment where I was like, oh, the book's a bestseller, and now I get to quit my day job. For me, it happened a different way, which was I had published three books. They had done relatively well, I guess, to varying degrees, some not so well. But, there's no way I could, stop working. And then because I had started working with an agent for TV and film, um, I had this opportunity to interview for the Westworld job. And so that's how I left. That's how I both got a salary and health insurance for our family. Um, and so that has slowly transitioned into my new thing, which is I'm writing for TV and film, basically as like a stable income, even though it's like you wouldn't think that's the most stable profession, but for me it has become one so far. And I still, write fiction as well. So that was a
Yeah,
very
like
long answer. I'm sorry.
no, like I think that's really interesting. And what I realized that a lot of us when we're young, we think that you kind of, people say like one hit wonder when you do something and suddenly you can give up everything and just pursue that. But the reality is that it's not like that, right? It's not that simple. A lot of people have multiple side jobs just to be able to pursue their passion, and it takes a long time. And but the good thing is that if you keep going at it and you work hard, then you will slowly get to where you want to be. And I would say that, would you say that you have succeeded in life in some way, that, you've worked for, a big TV series, you've written so many books, and your book has even won awards. Would you consider yourself like, successful?
I mean, if you had asked me from 5, 10, 15 years ago, yeah, I would be thrilled that I had, actually had books that people had read, and worked on shows that people liked. And um, but in like, I don't know, just human nature, when I wake up, do I think, oh, I'm successful? I mean, no, I wake up feeling the same doubt and pressure and anxiety that I did when I first started, which if without it, I feel like I'd either get really complacent or, it'd be hard to actually want to keep producing work that, because the truth is, as you're saying, it is true that, um, that, yeah, there was never a moment of like, that I kind of dreamt about when I was first starting out, of like, oh, I get to walk into my boss's office and say, my book's on the bestseller list, I'll I'll see you. I'll be lunching at, whatever. Um, there was never that one like moment for me, but I didn't mind that. In fact, I don't know, like, I basically trying to say the process, it was the journey, not the destination. So I could have just said that, but it is really true. And that's because I actually enjoyed doing it. Like, I don't know that I love writing in the moment. I'm usually pretty frustrated, but I wouldn't have kept doing it. Like I had to have that internal, not pressure, but the desire to want to keep doing it. Otherwise, who would keep doing this? For like most years, I didn't make any money doing it. No one really was reading what I was writing for a lot of years. And, um, and yet I wouldn't trade any of that. I really, value all the times when I was just sort of messing around, not knowing if anyone would ever look at what I was writing. So I forgot where I was going with this. I'm rambling now, but well, maybe I never had a point. I'll just stop talking.
No, I think no, I mean you're absolutely right. You mentioned that, if life is just like simple and you become complacent, you won't like keep pushing yourself to do more. So yeah, like I think that's absolutely right. And moving on to like your book, Interior Chinatown, I'd love to know more about, what inspires you to write it. And I guess maybe for listeners or the audience who don't know about the book, like if you can give us like a really brief like, synopsis of what actually the book is about, that would be great as well.
Sure. Um, yeah, I'll start with the synopsis, I guess. It's basically the story of a guy named Willis Wu. And Willis is, uh, he lives in a little bit of a weird universe. It's not exactly the world we live in. It's more like an amalgam of TV reality and our world. It's as if you were, the way I describe it is as if um, you were in the New York City of, say, Law and Order, or any sort of classic police procedural show, and you were dropped into that world, but it wasn't just what was going on within the frame. It was a kind of 3D open world environment. And so Willis is a background character. He is, in the book, he's generic Asian man number 3 slash delivery guy. And he doesn't have much to do. He's not really part of the main story. So he gets to sort of be free most of the time to live his life. And the few times he is on screen, he's sort of in the background and he doesn't have anything to say. He doesn't have lines. And so it's really trying to reorient or I guess it's trying to describe what this reality that he lives in would look like from the perspective of the background Asian guy, and I think what inspired me to write it was um, I kind of stumbled into it, to be honest. I think initially the impulse was to write about um, an immigrant story. My parents both immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan in the 1960s, and they told me a lot of stories when I was growing up, and I also just sort of absorbed a lot of their, everything as a kid. Just took it in. I didn't know what to do with all of that, and I had, you know, written things sort of obliquely or sort of where an immigrant experience was in the background or in the margins. But for this book, for some reason, I really felt like this. I don't know. I just thought now is when I'm going to try to tell this story about, and I tried for a long time to tell it in different ways, and it never really worked for various reasons that are too boring to go into. But and I think after working in TV for a while, this idea of like tell it through the perspective of a background Asian sort of bubbled up, and that became my way into the story, and when I finally started to have some traction with the writing. So that's kind of where it came from, and then it sort of grew from there.
Right. And I think what's so interesting about it, like as you were talking about as well, it's kind of like Inception, where it's like in a world. So you kind of, yeah, yeah, that was really is an interesting kind of idea. And the fact that the whole book is kind of written in this screenplay format as well. Is there a specific reason why you decided to go with that instead of like a normal kind of narrative format?
Yeah. um I think partly I had been writing for, TV shows at that point, and so it it felt like, well, if I'm going to tell the story of this character, and his reality is that he's basically watching from the side or from the back, how do I depict what that feels like, without basically, how do I show that there's a main story and there's someone watching from the dark, and then occasionally gets to sort of be sort of tangentially involved. um, and the most, I think, efficient way for the writer and the reader to establish the boundary, it was to have like a visual representation, like here's the script, and so this is where, the story is, and here's Willis kind of outside the story, and then occasionally jumping in and then back out. And that ability to have the characters both communicate through their roles, their jobs as like Asians on this show, as background Asians, and then to show who they are at home or when they're off camera. That duality was really what I was trying to capture. So the screenplay format um, turned out to be kind of the only way I could figure out how to do it. And then I also got to have fun with it. I think at one point I was pretty worried that it would either get pretty tiring, as for a reader to say like, oh, do it. And so I worried, well, how rigid do I have to be about sticking to my own rules? And then I don't know, I guess that all went out the window. Like 50 pages in, I'm just like writing, it's like, okay, whatever my rule was. It's not that I had like disregard for the rule, especially my editor and my agent were both reading drafts, and they were, really kind of questioning the logic. How does this work? Like you seem to be violating your own rule here. And so they helped me hammer that out a bit so it is more coherent. But yeah, that's basically what it was. And, I there are parts of screenwriting that, fiction will always be my first love, but one part of screenwriting I love is sort of the clarity of it. There's just so little, there's so much white space, so you can just feel so productive too, like you're just typing and it's like, oh, I already written 10 pages, it's been half a day. So so yeah, I just basically had fun with it, and it ended up working.
Yeah, and what would you say is your, main message behind your novel? And what would you like your, I guess, international readers, like especially your British readers, take away from the book?
Yeah. I don't know if I have um, a message, as much as um, you know, uh, I guess, well, one, gratitude, anxiety, all the feelings of like, here is a thing. I hope this resonates with you. I think um, I really, really wanted to tell a story from, like, I could hear Willis's voice in my head as a character. And I thought I would like to place a reader in that perspective. And that's part of why the book is written not just from Willis's perspective, but in second person. I um I wanted to drop a reader, whether or not they have any overlap with Willis in terms of personal life experience. Uh, You know, I want, for some people, things might specifically resonate based on their cultural heritage or based on their life experience. For other people, this might be a totally alien consciousness. It'd be like, I don't know what it's like to be Willis Wu. I don't know what it's like to feel like a generic Asian man. And so, great, like I'm excited about both, the whole spectrum of reader experiences. So that's really what I hope people can take away, is just what it's like to be this person, and to explore the lives of these other characters as well. And specifically, I mean, I'm really glad you asked it in terms of international readers. I mean, I both, as a somewhat provincial American, I don't, I would never, I don't pretend to know the first thing about how this might translate or might not translate, to the experience for people in other places. I do, so I'm very curious, one, whether or not it does translate. And when it doesn't, does it still shed some light maybe on, you know, on the experience of people, especially with regard to like Asian representation in other countries. So um, I'm trying to be a little more pithy. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope that there are some aspects that will speak to readers outside the U.S., but I I really don't know. I mean, you tell me, Steph.
Um, yeah, I mean, like personally, I would say that I kind of understand, the whole idea of being generic Asian man or generic Asian person in general. And I guess especially how Hollywood is such a big thing over around the whole world. Obviously, I don't know what other people from other countries feel as well, but personally in the UK, it's definitely kind of similar as well. I would say even to a certain even worse than America in terms of representation. A lot of like the TV series, you barely see any Asian, especially East and Southeast Asians in the UK. And we always joke about how even if there's one Asian person, they'll probably be killed off by a random car accident and they're just like gone within like few minutes. So they probably just have like a 1 minute screen time and that's it. And obviously, like most recently, because of Crazy Rich Asian or other Asian like movies are like coming out, it is getting better, but you would still see that, for example, like Gemma Chan became really big. And even back here in the UK, most of the series was like if they want to cast someone who's East or Southeast Asian, they would just usually go for Gemma Chan and not maybe another up and coming actor or actress just because she's just well known and that's it. And they kind of like, I feel like sometimes it's more of a tick box exercise. Like, okay, one Asian person done. Okay, that's it for the whole series or movie, which is unfortunate. But actually talking about that, I actually watched your you were on I think the Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and you were discussing like your book as well, and you kind of talked about the whole like the lack of on-screen representation of Asian American and the modern minority myth. Do you think that as an Asian American writer and screenwriter, do you think you have been a victim of the model minority myth as well? And if so, like, how did you deal with it?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if I have faced it specifically as a writer, but that's part of, I think, something you would never quite know. Like, you don't know how people talk about it when you're not in the room, or how they might unconsciously see you. I do sometimes feel like I have been, um, looked at in certain situations as, oh, we need an Asian voice. Here's an Asian face. That is an Asian voice. Or within the room, sometimes there are quite. I mean, generally, the places I've worked have been really sort of sincerely and conscientiously trying hard to be sensitive about portrayal, about representation, about telling different kinds of stories. But I do think there are times where it's like, um, yeah, especially I think going back to when I was a lawyer, I think I, you know, internalized some of it, but also faced external sort of perception of like, here's a hard worker who's quiet and diligent and isn't going to be the leader, but is someone we can depend on as like a solid number two, a solid number three. And I felt that. And I also probably projected that, maybe out of a sense of like wanting to be safe and secure. Um, so yeah, and I, I don't know. I do think things have changed, even definitely from when I started practicing 20 years ago. Um, but I still think they have a long way to go. So,
And do you like what do you think can, I guess, improve, representation of like Asian people on screen? Like, is it down to like the individual to, just be more active, go out of their comfort zone and just apply for roles that are not like usually for like specifically for Asian people? Or is it down to, you know, we just simply need more Asian representation behind the screen as well, because they are actually the people making the decision as to who's going to be on screen and who's going to play like whatever role that they write?
um, all of it. I think both of the things you said. I think behind the screen is important in terms of storytellers, for sure. Whether or not you tell a story that is like Crazy Rich Asians, where it's everyone, or just having the viewpoint, having the people, that are making the thing. Same with, like you said, decision makers, executives, producers, people that are, really gatekeepers. Um, and then the first part of what you said to me is like something that I think is overlooked. So I'm really glad you mentioned it. But it's like not not pigeonholing ourselves, bringing, not assuming. And I'm not sure, I'm not saying people do this, and even if you did, it's understandable after a long history of being stereotyped and pigeonholed. um it's only natural that, it might. I mean, this is part of a big part of why I wrote the book, that how much do we internalize these roles, and how much do we internalize what we're told we're allowed to be, or to try to fit into categories, knowing that that's where we can get work, or that's where we can be accepted. um, and I love what you said is, to push against that, to show, all of who we are as individuals, and how we don't have to conform to molds, how, because to me that's what the real progress is. Yes, I've enjoyed Crazy Rich Asians. I thought, I Gemma Chan's great, and what's also great is that she was in a movie full of other Asians, that she wasn't just like the only one. Because I remember watching, I think it was Humans, which it was on AMC over
Yeah.
here, and thinking that's great. But it's usually like kind of what you're getting at. There's one Asian, and that's the Asian in the show. And we're lucky if the Asian's a lead like that. Otherwise, they're going to get killed off, or they're going to, go away and never be seen again after an episode. So that's really important, for sure, those kinds of stories. But I think just as important as what you're saying is where it's not necessarily explicitly about, anything cultural or heritage or anything like that. It's Asians as humans just being humans, and being who they are and having quirks and flaws and getting the chance to like be actual characters in these stories. That's the real kind of goal. And I do think, it's interesting to hear you talk about it. It seems to be better in the US than in Britain. I do think there has been progress in the last few years here. And hopefully that will continue, because I think, another part of why I wrote the book is, someone might say, well, how much does it really matter? Like isn't the strides we've made in, say, legal equality or job hire, employment practices, or aren't all of those things more important than just like what's in TV and film? But I think, for me, the argument is there's a disproportionate amount of power, that TV and film, does to shape perception, does to actually shape or distort reality. And when you don't see Asians on screen, or when you only see them in certain kind of specific stereotyped roles, it does affect, how both Asians see themselves and how non-Asians see Asians as being part of the fabric of society or not part of the fabric of society, at least in the US. And so that, I think, now I am kind of making a message, even though I said there's no message. But if there were any kind of like idea behind it, which is that's kind of the world Willis lives in, is this hybrid between TV and reality, because I think those things talk to each other. There's a feedback loop inside there. And so yeah, I went off on a long tangent. I apologize.
No, I think what you said is absolutely right. And I guess what would your advice be for, younger writers who maybe like you is doing something else in their life and decide to pursue writing, but maybe is afraid, or just in general, like avid writers, what would your advice be for them?
Write your story, without censoring yourself. Don't aim for a target that you think is out there. Like, try to bring everything you are into it. I think, and also read a lot. read 9 times more than you write. I don't know, something like that.
And, like, just final question to close it off. Do you have any future projects, that up and coming projects that you are working on? Yeah, anything like coming soon that people want to know about?
I've got some stuff that's really exciting that I can't talk about yet, but I do have one thing I'm allowed to talk about, which is I'm attempting to adapt Interior Chinatown for a series, for Hulu, the
Wow.
streamer here. So if I can figure out how to do it, to their satisfaction, hopefully we'll get to see what it looks like on screen. So, but it's been a fun challenge so far.
Well, that sounds really exciting. Yeah, like, I mean, I wish you all the best, and I really hope that I can watch it one day as well over in the UK.
Yeah, me too.
Well, yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for, joining me and sharing your story. I really had a lot of fun chatting, so yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steph. Thank you.
Thank you.